I caught my spoiled sister kissing my boyfriend a week before the wedding, and do you know what happened next? And then I caught my spoiled sister making out with my boyfriend just a week before her wedding. I couldn't handle it and decided to call her fiancé. At first, I thought he had ignored the situation, but he ended up making a huge announcement on the wedding day. As a 28-year-old woman, I found myself in a tough spot between my 26-year-old sister and my 29-year-old boyfriend. My sister's wedding was approaching, and I noticed some odd behavior from her around my boyfriend. It wasn't blatantly obvious at first, just small things that made me uneasy. It all started with her offhand comments. She'd say things like, "Wow, you're so funny," even when my boyfriend's jokes weren't all that great. She'd laugh a bit too hard at everything he said. Initially, I tried to dismiss it, thinking she was just being extra friendly due to the wedding excitement. But as time went on, I saw more. She began finding excuses to touch him casually, a hand on his arm while talking or accidentally bumping into him as she passed by. It was subtle, but it was definitely happening. I'd catch her looking at him a little too long when he wasn't paying attention, and it made my stomach turn. One night, after we returned from a family dinner where my sister had been particularly flirty, I decided to bring it up with my boyfriend. "Did you notice how Jessica was acting tonight?" I asked him. He looked puzzled and replied, "What do you mean?" I explained the laughing, the touching, and the looks I'd observed. He listened, but then he just shrugged it off. "I think you're overreacting," he said. "She's probably just excited about the wedding. It's harmless." But to me, it didn't feel harmless. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to keep a closer watch on things, hoping I was mistaken. The next few weeks were tense. Every time we were around my sister, I couldn't help but watch her closely. I noticed more and more little things that bothered me. She would always sit next to my boyfriend whenever possible. She'd find excuses to ask for his help with wedding-related tasks, even when I was right there. One day, we were all at my parents' house for a family barbecue. I went inside to use the bathroom, and when I came back out, I saw my sister and my boyfriend talking quietly in a corner of the yard. They were standing close together, and my sister was giggling at something he said. When they noticed me, they quickly separated, and my sister walked away. I felt a knot in my stomach. I wanted to confront them right then and there, but I didn't want to create a scene at the family gathering, so I waited until we got home that night. "What were you and Jessica talking about earlier?" I asked my boyfriend as casually as I could. He seemed surprised by the question. "Oh, just some wedding stuff. She was asking my opinion on the music selection," he replied. I raised an eyebrow and asked, "And that required you to stand so close together?" He sighed and said, "Come on, not this again. I told you there's nothing going on. Sarah's just being friendly." I couldn't hold back anymore. "Friendly? She's practically throwing herself at you, and you're not doing anything to stop it." He looked hurt and responded, "What do you want me to do? She's your sister. I'm trying to be nice to her. I can't just tell her to go away." I suggested, "You could set some boundaries. You could make it clear you're not interested." He insisted, "But I'm not interested. There's nothing to make clear. You're seeing things that aren't there." We argued for a while, but it didn't lead anywhere. He kept insisting I was imagining things, and I couldn't make him understand what seemed so obvious to me. We ended up going to bed angry and frustrated. The next day, I decided I needed to talk to my sister directly. I called her and asked if we could meet for coffee. She agreed, sounding cheerful and unaware of my concerns. We met at a small cafe near her apartment. I was nervous, my hands shaking slightly as I stirred my coffee. My sister chatted happily about her plans, not noticing my discomfort. Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Sarah," I interrupted, "we need to talk about something." She looked at me, surprised by my serious tone. "What's wrong?" she asked. I took a deep breath and said, "I've noticed how you've been acting around Brian lately," referring to my boyfriend. "The flirting, the touching, the way you look at him, it needs to stop." "Stop!" I shouted, feeling a whirlwind of emotions cross my sister's face. First surprise, then confusion, and finally anger. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "I haven't been flirting with Tom." "Yes, you have," I insisted, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe you don't even realize it, but you are, and it's making me really uncomfortable." She laughed, but it wasn't a joyful sound. It was almost mocking. You're being ridiculous, she said, rolling her eyes. Tom's practically family. I'm just being friendly. It's more than that, I countered, frustration creeping into my voice. You're always looking for reasons to be near him, to touch him. You laugh at all his jokes, even the bad ones. It's obvious what you're doing. Her face turned red with anger. I can't believe you're accusing me of this, she snapped, crossing her arms. Especially right before my wedding. Are you really that insecure? Her words hit me hard, but I pressed on. This isn't about insecurity. It's about respect. You're crossing a line, and it needs to stop. She abruptly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm not going to sit here and listen to this, she declared, her voice rising. You're being paranoid and ridiculous. If you can't trust your own sister, that's your problem, not mine. With that, she stormed out of the cafe, leaving me sitting there feeling utterly alone. As I sat there, doubt started creeping in. Had I really just been imagining things? Was I overreacting? When I got home, my boyfriend was waiting for me. He could tell something was wrong the moment I walked in. What happened? He asked, concern in his eyes. I told him about my confrontation with Sarah, watching his face grow more troubled as I spoke. When I finished, he sighed heavily. I think you've made a big mistake, he said gently. Sarah's going to be really hurt by this, and right before her wedding, too. His words made me defensive. So you're taking her side? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shook his head. I'm not taking sides. I'm just saying I don't think Jessica was flirting with me. And even if she was, which I doubt, confronting her like this wasn't the best way to handle it. Tears welled up in my eyes. So what was I supposed to do? Just ignore it? He came over and wrapped his arms around me. You could have talked to me more about it, or maybe approached Jessica in a less accusatory way. Now she's probably going to be upset with both of us, and it's going to make the wedding really awkward. I pulled away from him, feeling more alone than ever. So this is all my fault? I asked, my voice cracking. He sighed again, looking weary. I didn't say that. I just think you might have overreacted a bit. We argued some more, but it was clear we weren't going to see eye to eye. Eventually, he went to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The next few days were tense. My sister wasn't speaking to me, and my parents called, wanting to know why Jessica was so upset. I tried to explain, but I could tell they thought I was overreacting too. The wedding was fast approaching, and I was in a state of confusion and anxiety. I was supposed to be a bridesmaid, but now I wasn't even sure if Jessica wanted me there. My boyfriend was still invited, and he thought we should both go to show there were no hard feelings. But the thought of watching my sister walk down the aisle, knowing she was upset with me, made me feel sick. I tried calling Jessica a few times, but she never answered. I left voicemails apologizing and asking to talk, but she didn't call back. I even went to her apartment, but she wouldn't open the door. As the wedding day drew nearer, my anxiety grew. My boyfriend kept telling me to relax, that everything would blow over, but I wasn't convinced. I even had a nightmare where I showed up at the wedding, and everyone turned to stare at me, whispering and pointing. I woke up in a cold sweat. Things took a turn for the worse after my confrontation with Sarah. She told our mom about the accusations I'd made, and my mom was furious. She called me, yelling about how I could be so selfish and paranoid right before Sarah's wedding. How could you accuse your own sister of something like this? She demanded. I tried to explain my side, but she wouldn't listen. She insisted that I apologize to Jessica immediately and fix this mess. The tension in our family was unbearable. Jessica still wouldn't speak to me, and now my parents were upset too. My boyfriend Tom kept telling me I was overreacting, which only made me feel more isolated and frustrated. About a week before the wedding, I decided to go to my parents' house to try and smooth things over. As I approached the front door, I heard muffled voices coming from the side of the house. Curious, I walked around to the garden and froze in shock at what I saw. Partially hidden behind a large shrub were Jessica and Tom, locked in a passionate embrace, kissing deeply. Tom's hand was under Sarah's shirt, and her legs were wrapped around his waist. They were so caught up in each other that they didn't even notice me standing there. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. All the air was knocked out of my lungs. For a moment, I was paralyzed, unable to move or speak. Then, as the reality of what I was seeing sank in, a wave of anger and betrayal washed over me. "What the hell is this?" I screamed, my voice breaking the stillness. They jumped apart. looking guilty and shocked. Sarah's face went pale, while Brian started stammering. It's not what it looks like. But it was exactly what it looked like. All my suspicions, all my fears that everyone had dismissed as paranoia, were suddenly confirmed in the worst possible way. How could you? I choked out, tears streaming down my face. My own sister and my boyfriend? Jessica started crying too. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. We didn't mean for this to happen. But I couldn't bear to hear their excuses. I turned and ran back to my car, ignoring their calls for me to come back. As I drove away, my phone started ringing. First Tom, then Sarah, then my mom. I ignored them all. When I got home, I packed a bag with some clothes and essentials. I sent a text to Tom. We're done. Don't try to contact me again. Then I turned off my phone and left. I'm writing this from a hotel room in a nearby city. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I found myself in a strange city, unsure of what to do next. The wedding was just around the corner, but there was no way I could face my sister or anyone else after what had happened. My relationship had crumbled, and the betrayal by my sister left me feeling like I was in a nightmare. Everyone had dismissed my concerns, making me feel paranoid, but I had been right all along. Now, I was left grappling with the aftermath, unsure if I could ever trust anyone again. Update. After catching Jessica and Brian together, I felt like I was in a fog for days. My phone was inundated with calls and messages from them and my parents, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Eventually, I realized Mark, Sarah's fiancé, needed to know the truth. It was a difficult decision, but I called him. When David picked up, he sounded confused and concerned. Hey, what's going on? Sarah's been frantic, saying you've disappeared. I took a deep breath and recounted everything, from my suspicions to what I'd seen in the garden. David listened quietly, his only response being an occasional sound of acknowledgement. When I finished, he paused for a long moment before saying, Thanks for telling me. I need time to process this. And with that, he hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone, wondering what would happen next. As the wedding day drew near, there was silence from both David and my family. Jessica had stopped reaching out, and I assumed she had somehow convinced David to stay. The idea that she might escape any consequences while my life was in shambles was infuriating. I couldn't stomach the thought of attending the wedding, so I decided to stay away, trying to sort out my own feelings and future. On the evening of the wedding, my cousin Olivia called, her voice filled with urgency and excitement. You won't believe what just happened, she exclaimed. I felt a rush of anxiety and asked her to explain. Olivia described the scene at the church, where everything had appeared normal at first. Jessica looked radiant, and David stood waiting at the altar. But then, when it was time for the vows, David stepped forward with a serious expression and said he needed to make an announcement. Olivia continued, her voice breathless with the drama of it all. David told everyone he couldn't marry someone who betrayed her own sister by getting involved with her boyfriend. Jessica turned white as a sheet. Then he turned to your parents and said they deserved to know why you hadn't been speaking to anyone. Olivia described how chaos erupted, Jessica sobbing, my parents in shock, and the guests whispering among themselves. David then walked out of the church, leaving Jessica devastated at the altar. It was like something out of a soap opera, Olivia said, clearly shocked. I sat there stunned. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction that the truth had been exposed, but another part of me felt the weight of the pain and turmoil this revelation would cause. Are you okay? Olivia asked, noticing my silence. I hesitated before answering. I don't know. I never imagined it would end this way. After finishing the call with Emma, I sat in the quiet of my hotel room, trying to make sense of everything. The truth was out in the open, but it didn't bring the relief I had hoped for. My relationship with Brian was irreparably broken. My sister's betrayal was laid bare, and now my family was caught in the storm. The reality that truth-telling can be both a balm and a blade settled in. I realized that while honesty had cleared the air, it hadn't fixed anything. The damage was done, and the road to healing would be long and uncertain. Now, I find myself at a crossroads, uncertain of the future. I know I'll have to face my family eventually, but for now, I'm taking things one step at a time. If there's one thing this ordeal has taught me, it's the value of trusting my instincts and standing up for myself, even when others don't believe me. To everyone who supported me during this difficult time, your encouragement has been invaluable. And for anyone in a similar situation, remember to trust yourself and don't let others make you question your reality.